Okay, so what I'm about to show you is how to do a transformation. So we talked about how for a lot of statistical tests, there's the requirement that your quantitative variables be somewhat normally distributed, meaning they're not skewed. Well, we've already determined that we have two variables that are pretty substantially skewed, meaning they're not normal, so we might run into problems when we go to test different hypotheses with these variables. Well, one thing that you can do is you can perform a transformation. That's just one option. It's just the option that we're going over today. We will discuss other options for how to handle issues of non-normality. Okay, so we have determined that the stress variable is negatively skewed, and we talked about how the type of skewness dictates what type of transformation you're going to do. So we're going to start with a square transformation and see if that makes our data more normal, and if it doesn't, then we'll move on to a cube transformation. So we're just going to go to our data real quick. Okay, so here's our data. And here's the stress variable. Again, this is a negatively skewed variable, so we're going to try a square transformation first. So what we're going to do is we're going to transform this variable so that every single one of these values is got a squared version. So we'll get a new variable at the end of this data set where this 8 will now be a 64, this 8 will be a 64, this 7 will be a 49, so on and so forth. So here's how you do that. You go to transform, compute variable. I'm going to reset this so it doesn't confuse you. I had done some stuff earlier, so it still had what I was doing earlier in there. But yours should look like this. Well, let's grab our stress variable and let's put it over here. And the way you make a squared version of this is you do 2 asterisks and then the number 2. Now, in the target variable box, this is where you're going to tell SPSS what the name of this new variable is. You're going to want to tell it something that lets you know that it's the squared version of this variable. So I'm just going to call it squared work underscore stress. You have to do underscores between words because SPSS does not like spaces. Okay. So then you should be able to click OK. Nothing really happens in your output, but if you go to the end of your data set, you see that you now have a new variable and it is indeed got the squared version of all these values. Okay, so all these values have now been squared. Well, let's see if this helped with our distribution. So we want a more normal distribution, meaning we don't want the values to be as skewed. We're hoping that now our values will be within that acceptable -5 to 5 skewness range. So let's go to Analyze, Descriptives, Explore, and let's get this new version of the variable, squared work stress. Under Plots, let's click, well, histogram and normality plots with tests are already clicked, so let's click Continue, and then OK. So if we look, where we're looking at squared work stress, we can see that our skewness value is now within that -5 to 5 acceptable range. Let's go down and look at our Shapiro-Wilks test. Well, our Shapiro-Wilks test is no longer significant at less than 0.05, so this means that our variable is now normally distributed. Just so you know, if at this point our variable was still problematic and highly skewed, we could then go and try to do a cube transformation and see if that helps. So the way you do a cube transformation is you would go to compute variable, you would take work stress, do 2 asterisks and then a 3, and then call it cube work stress, and then OK. So at the end of your data set, now you have a cubed version of this variable. Now, this variable was more normal, so I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to go and do a more substantial transformation and further alter my data because I already have it where I need to be. But this is how you would do it if you needed to. And you would also obviously want to check too that this improved your distribution. So I'm just going to delete that. Now, we also had another variable that was problematic. Remember, years as a nurse was positively skewed. So if you don't remember we already assessed that distribution. If we go back here we see from this output that years as a nurse was positively skewed, and we see here that our Shapiro-Wilks test was significant at less than 0.05, so it does suggest that we have a problem with normality here. Anyways, going back to our data set, we know that this is positively skewed. So one of the things that you can try with positively skewed distributions is you can try to do a square root transformation, and if that doesn't help, then you can try a log transformation. But let's try a square root transformation first. Let's go to compute variable. I'm going to reset all this, and now we're working with the years as a nurse variable. So this is the variable we're going to want to work with. But first, we need to go over here to arithmetic and scroll down and find the square root function. Arrow that up, okay? Then we want to replace this question mark with our variable. So we're going to take the variable and arrow it over. So it replaced the question mark. But now we need to tell SPSS that our new variable name is the square root version of this years as nurse. So let's do square root, or you can type out the full square root word. Okay, so now I'm going to click OK, and if I go to the end of my data set, you can see that I have a variable that's square root years as a nurse. Okay, so let's see if this puts us in that acceptable -5 to 5 skewness range and helps our normality. Let's go to Analyze, Descriptives, Explore, click Reset, get square root years as a nurse, and arrow that over into the dependence box. And under Plots, let's click Histogram and Normality Plots with Tests. And then click Continue and OK. So let's go down to our output here. So our skewness is now 0.851. So that's still not real great, and you can see that our Shapiro-Wilks test is still less than 0.05. So now we might need to try a log transformation to see if that helps. So let's go to Transform, Compute Variable, Reset. Let's make sure we get the original years as a nurse variable and not the square root version, because if we do, then we'll be making a log transformation of the square transformation. So let's do how many years as a nurse, but first let's go to arithmetic, get log 10, arrow that up, and then grab our years as a nurse variable and replace that. And then I'm going to say log years as a nurse. And click OK. So now we have a log version of this variable. So let's see if that actually helped with our distribution. Click Reset, Log, and then Plots, Histogram, and Normality Plots with Tests. I want to make sure those are checked. Continue, and OK. So now our skewness is better, and so is our Shapiro-Wilks test. It's no longer significant at less than 0.05. So we now have our data in pretty normal format, and we would want to make sure that any hypotheses we test, we use these versions of the variables that are more normally distributed, these new versions of the variables. Okay, and that's how you do a transformation.